So I spent my career as a federal prosecutor. I worked at the Department of Justice. I was there for 22 years. I started off prosecuting petty drug cases, street-level drug trafficking, that kind of thing. Graduated to doing big drug cases, drug importing. I prosecuted a lot of organized crime drug cases in the 90s. Yes, the 90s, when probably most of you were like in kindergarten. Then I spent about 10 or 12 years doing just nothing but financial crime, stock manipulation, tax evasion, Competition Act, money laundering, stuff like that. Very exciting. Lots of documents to read. Spent hours in my office reading documents. That's what you get to do as a lawyer. Very exciting. You're all saying, thank God I didn't become a lawyer. So I had the very good fortune of being able to work in a bunch of different places in the government. I worked, as I said, at the Department of Justice, but I did some secondments. I worked at the RCMP in the financial crimes area, and I also worked at the Ontario Securities Commission for just under a year on a secondment doing securities enforcement. So those were all fun things. The most fun you can have as a lawyer, I think, is doing bail hearings at Old City Hall, where many people who are brought before the justice system are very unfortunate. They're in unfortunate circumstances, but sometimes it's very entertaining. I have to say, one of the first days I was a prosecutor, a very brand new prosecutor, I was put into bail court, and this, I got to tell you, it's almost the only time anything exciting happens. And this is what made me realize criminal law was for me. I was doing a bail hearing, one of my very first bail hearings. I had no idea what I was doing, and I'm trying to get a guy detained, and all of a sudden, and the defense lawyer is making some submissions about what an unfortunate life his client has had, and I won't tell you what he said because I'm being recorded, and the guy all of a sudden leaps out of the box, tackles his own lawyer, the accused, and starts beating him up. I'm like, whoa. And the guards, who I don't think liked this particular criminal lawyer, let the guy pound his lawyer for a while until they finally sort of reluctantly pulled him off. And then I decided, this is exciting, and this is what I want to do. So actually, I have to say it was sort of downhill from there in terms of excitement, but it was definitely a good career. So I was, as I said, I was a lawyer for 22 years. I applied to become a judge, and I got very, very lucky, and I got appointed as a judge. Got a call from the Minister of Justice one day. Would you like to be a judge? I said, well, I applied. Yes, I would. And that's basically what happened. That's how I got there. So I'll talk a bit about what Superior Court of Justice does. I'll try not to make it too technical. But basically, we are what's called a court of inherent jurisdiction. So I was explaining it to one of the people in this room earlier. We essentially, now it's obviously gotten a little more sophisticated over the years, but we essentially are the Queen's justice. We're the monarch's justice. We are, justice flows from the crown in our theory of government. So, our Queen is the head of state, everybody knows that. But basically, how do judges develop? Well, it's not much more complicated than this. Probably everybody in the room knows the Magna Carta is 800 years old. This is the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta, one of the founding documents of the common law, which is our legal system. So 800 years ago, 900 years ago, 500 years ago, two neighbors have a dispute. They're arguing over who owns a cow. Who owns that cow in the field? What do? They go to the king. They say, Your Majesty, it's my cow. No, it's my cow. They argue. The king decides. That was a court 800 years ago under a tree. Well, it's not that much different now, but the king's a busy guy, as it turns out, and so he started delegating to judges, to deputies, and so basically what I'm doing is 800 years later, people like me are deciding, on behalf of the king, who gets the cow. That's essentially what we're doing. So our power, we're a court of inherent jurisdiction. We exercise the power of the crown in terms of justice. So Superior Court just means we supervise inferior courts, but that's because theoretically, if there were inferior tribunals around England, the king would have his justice, and it was always a king until much later, the king would have his justice go out and supervise and make sure these inferior courts, who had the power to really stick it to the little guy, weren't doing that. So that's how the Superior Court came about. So other courts, like say traffic court or courts of appeal, they're created by the legislature or parliament. They're statutory courts. They don't have inherent power. Whoa, that's okay. You know what? I can project. I used to be in the Army. I have a big voice. Oh, well, I'm back. Anyway, so basically what that means is theoretically the Superior Court has unlimited power, although we tend not to exercise it. So what does that mean from day to day, what we do? We do all the civil cases in the system, family law, commercial law, slip and falls, that kind of thing. And we do the serious criminal cases. We do about 10% of the criminal cases, but they're generally the most serious cases: murder, serious drug trafficking, serious sexual assaults, things of that nature. The Ontario Court of Justice, or the Provincial Court, does 90% of all the criminal work. They say they do the real criminal work. Let them say that. But we have about 10% of the criminal cases. But it's all the things like murders. We do jury trials. You don't have juries anywhere else except in the Superior Court. So that's what we do. So what's a day in the life of a judge? As I say, we try to be a little mysterious. There has to be a little bit of, mystery, a little bit of gravity sitting there, but we are actually people. May surprise some people who come before us and litigate, but we actually are people. So what's a day in the life? For me, believe it or not, the most important part of my day is getting to the gym first thing in the morning, or going for a run first thing in the morning. And that's because in this job, you sit around a lot, and you sit around more. And the more you sit around, the more I eat. And so, you're going to get fat, let's be honest, if you keep sitting there. So for me, it's incredibly important to go to the gym every day. I also ride my bike to work a lot, which leads to a funny story. When I first got appointed, I rode my bike into the garage at the courthouse down here at 361 University, and I looked pretty much like a bicycle courier, except only scruffier. And I had just gotten my judge ID, and all the court guards immediately glom onto me, as I ride my bike in. And you actually are allowed to ride your bike in and park it in the judge garage. And, they're like, who the heck are you? And, you look, I looked like a guy who should be in the cells, truthfully. I showed them my ID, and they're like, whoa, Your Honor, we're so sorry. I was like, guys, I would have tackled me too if I were me. So, but anyway, there are like about 2 other judges who ride their bikes to work as well. So get to the office, and then the day it's a very, very busy day when you're a judge. You usually have pretrials, you usually have sentencings, you may have lawyers coming to see you, you may have conference calls. I usually start about 8:30 after I get to the gym. Some of my colleagues are there incredibly early. So for example, our Chief Justice, a man named George Strathy, the most hardworking man in the world, no matter how early I get there, and sometimes I get there about 5, he's there before me. And there are lots of others. There are a lot of workaholics on the bench. Judges tend to work very hard. Court usually starts at 10. If you're doing a trial, you might be picking a jury, you're hearing evidence. Right now I'm doing a stint doing criminal law, so I'm hearing criminal law cases, which means it's sort of what I'm familiar with. I have done a lot of civil cases, which I freely admit not very familiar with, and have made some mistakes, but, doing my best. And then you spend the day essentially sitting in court and listening. And I got to tell you, from about 10 in the morning till about 4:30 in the afternoon, just sitting there and listening is incredibly hard. Have any of you ever sat in a jury? No? Okay. So if you've ever sat on a jury, you would know it's incredibly hard to just sit there and listen, and you have to concentrate and you have to get every word. And so at the end of the day, you're pretty tired. So court ends at 4:30, and you're probably thinking, well, that's an easy job. I can work till 4:30 every day. The problem is that at the end of 4:30, actually that's almost when your day starts again, because that's when you've got to summarize the evidence. You've got to be writing judgments from weeks before. If you're doing a jury trial, you have to be preparing the jury charge that you're going to give to the jury at the end. So I find myself working quite late most nights, preparing for the next day or preparing a trial. It's actually quite a bit of work. Those of you who are smart enough not to choose law, you're very wise. It's a very time-consuming profession, whether you're a judge or a lawyer. It's also a very isolating job, truthfully. Like, you sit there and, I'll be honest, when I was a lawyer at the Department of Justice, I went for coffee a lot with my friends. Now, nobody comes to visit. Just sit there, do my work. I don't go for coffee, almost never. So I try to meet my friends, try to do things like that. And then I go home and I work at night. So that's the day in the life of a judge. It's not that exciting, I'm sorry. Certainly not as exciting as being a guy who has a TV program on basketball. That's definitely more exciting. Promise you. So I thought I'd talk a bit about the last thing is what are some of the challenges facing our justice system today, which hopefully none of you will ever be involved in litigation, but if you are, these are the challenges. The number one challenge, and our Chief Justice of Canada has talked about it, Chief Justice of Ontario has talked about it, it's access to justice. Lawyers are frickin' expensive. Law is expensive. If you have a dispute, or even if you need to get a will or, sell your house or buy a house, it's very expensive. It makes it very, very difficult for ordinary people of regular means to go to court. And so the number one problem that we have is making sure that regular people have access to our justice system. This has been, as I said, it's been flagged by sort of every participant in the justice system. I would say it's probably particularly acute in Toronto, which is a city that has a lot of very expensive law firms and a lot of people who need legal services that perhaps can't afford them. And I'm not criticizing anyone or knocking anyone, but that's just the structure of the profession. So that is a big problem that we have. What that means is on any given day, there are a lot of people who are representing themselves in the court system. People who represent themselves are asking for trouble. It is very difficult to represent yourself. Now, I know it seems pretty easy. You've all seen law shows, how hard can it be? Let's be honest, right? Actually, it is that hard. I promise you, whatever you've seen on TV, actually, I used to say this to juries when I was a Crown. The first thing I would always say was, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I just want to warn you that everything you've seen on TV, forget about it. It's exactly the opposite. What you're about to see now is not as exciting, and none of the participants are as good looking. And I always got a little laugh from the jury, but it's actually true. So whatever you've seen on TV is not realistic. You can't people do represent themselves. Sometimes they do an okay job, but it is very difficult. It means that everything takes longer. It means that fewer people have access to the system, and it means the people who are accessing it themselves have a more difficult time. It's especially acute in family law. Family law is about 40% of what the Superior Court of Justice does. Unfortunately, a lot of people need the resources of the family law system. And it's very expensive and difficult. So this is a difficult problem. I don't have the answer. I'm just flagging the problem. And it's something that everyone in the system is aware of. That is our number one challenge. I think our number two challenge, and this is just me talking, I think our number two challenge is technology. Right now in the court system, we are very advanced. We are using technology that was perfected in about 1885. So it works. It works. Everything's on paper. It's amazing. You go and look in the file system, and everything's on paper. Literally, it's like, what's this? Now, I think we are getting better. There's more use of things like Dropbox type systems to file documents and things like that. But we're still in 1885, truthfully. So. What about social media? How do we deal with people who want to tweet from the courtroom? How do we deal with people who want to surreptitiously use their cell phones to film what's going on in the courtroom? As you may know, it's illegal to bring a camera into the courtroom in Ontario, which is probably okay because it's not that exciting. But there are people for sure who are filming proceedings, which is illegal. But what do we do about that? These are some of the questions that we've been grappling with. Our court actually has a policy on dealing with Twitter and email from the courtroom. But, what about people posting on social media, comments about the judge, comments about their case, people litigating through social media? So these are sort of questions that I think face our system that we're just sort of starting to grasp. One of the problems may be that I'm 52 and I'm one of the youngest judges, so, maybe we're not as aware of it as perhaps other younger segments of the population, but it is definitely an issue that we have to deal with and that we are still grappling with. How are we going to recognize that things like social media are, and I'm picking on social media, but it's not confined to that, are going to be an ongoing reality to what happens in the justice system. So I guess I would finish on at that point by just saying that technology has disrupted, as we're all aware, has disrupted pretty much every facet of life except in the justice system. So it's going to get disrupted. I don't know how. Who knows? I'm not a futurist. It will get disrupted. And the big question that I think we in the justice system are going to have to grapple with is, what do we do about it? How do we figure it out? How do we still manage to deliver the kind of effective and fair justice to Canadians that is expected? We do live in a society governed by the rule of law. I have been to places where they have no rule of law, and trust me, it's better to be in a place with the rule of law than a place without the rule of law, way better. So the ongoing challenge is, how do we continue to deliver that? When we have all these technological disruptions out there, we have these constraints on the system. So thank you for listening to me drone. It's not that exciting, I know, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.